The Ferrari was supposed to roar at noon. Instead, it sat dead under 3 white spotlights, a $12 million corpse in the center of Marina Bellamy's showroom, while 11 investors waited upstairs with contracts that could decide the future of her company. 60 mechanics, engineers, and elite restoration experts surrounded the car like surgeons around a dying patient, but every test came back clean. Battery, fuel, ignition timing. Nothing explained why the engine refused to live. Marina stood behind the glass wall, calm on the outside, but inside she could feel 4 years of fighting, proving, and surviving begin to crack. Then the side door opened. A man in dusty boots stepped in carrying a cardboard box of parts. Nolan Mercer was not on the guest list. No one turned to greet him. To them, he was just a delivery driver with grease under his nails, a tired face, and a cheap jacket that looked wildly out of place beside million-dollar machines. But Nolan heard the arguments, glanced once at the Ferrari, and stopped walking. Something was wrong. Not loud, not obvious, just a whisper hiding beneath the noise of experts who had already checked everything except the one thing that mattered. He put the box down. Across the room, Roland Venn, the most respected Ferrari specialist in the state, was seconds from admitting defeat. Marina had minutes before the investors came downstairs, and then Nolan said the sentence no one expected from a stranger. "I think I know why it won't start." Every eye turned on him. Some laughed, some frowned. Marina had one impossible choice: trust the invisible man or watch her empire collapse in silence. But who was Nolan Mercer really? And why had a genius been hiding behind a delivery truck? At 6:47 in the morning, Nolan Mercer's phone began to vibrate beneath his pillow. He had set it that way years ago, back when Junie was still small enough to wake at every sharp sound in the house. Now she was 7, old enough to sleep through storms, barking dogs, and the occasional coughing fit of his old Ford truck outside, but Nolan still kept the alarm hidden under the pillow out of habit. Some habits were built from love. Others were built from fear. Most of his were both. He opened his eyes and stared at the stain on the ceiling above his bed. It had been there since the first winter after they moved into the small house at the edge of Ash Creek, Nevada. In certain light, it looked like a crooked map of a place he had never been. He had promised himself he would patch it. He had promised himself that last month and the month before that, and sometime last year. But there was always a parts order, a school pickup, an invoice that did not balance, or a little girl calling from the kitchen because she could not find the cereal she insisted was right in front of her. Nolan got up quietly. The house was cold as it always was before sunrise. He padded into the kitchen in socks and an old gray shirt, turned the knob on the gas stove, and waited through 3 clicks before the flame caught. The coffee maker on the counter had a crack running up one side of the glass pot. He had fixed it twice with food-safe epoxy, and every time he used it, he told himself this would be the week he bought a new one. Then he would look at the grocery bill or Junie's school forms, or the parts supplier that needed payment up front, and the cracked coffee pot would survive another week. Outside the window, Ash Creek was slowly turning blue. It was not the kind of town people moved to for a better life. It was the kind of town people found when they needed a quieter one. One main road, one diner, one elementary school, one gas station, and miles of dry land stretching in every direction. The people waved when they drove past, but they did not ask too much. Nolan liked that. He had chosen Ash Creek because it was small enough to let a man disappear without making it dramatic. His shop sat 3 miles away at the end of Ridgeline Road. Mercer Precision Parts was printed on the side of his 2009 Ford F250 in faded black letters. Under that, in smaller print, were the words Specialty Sourcing and Restoration. Most clients called him for rare seals, old gaskets, discontinued sensors, handmade fittings, or some obscure part a dealership had given up trying to find. A few knew he could rebuild engines. Almost none knew what kind. That, too, was deliberate. Above him, the floorboards creaked. Junie was awake. Nolan heard the small, uneven thumps of her feet crossing her bedroom, then the bathroom door closing, then opening again. A minute later, she appeared at the bottom of the stairs with her hair tangled, one sock on, and the expression of someone who had already decided the world was mildly disappointing. "Morning, Bug," Nolan said. "Is there cereal?" "Top shelf. The good one. Depends who you ask." She gave him a look so sharp it would have frightened a weaker man. "Second shelf." He reached up, took down the box, and set it on the table. Junie poured too much into the bowl, as always. Flakes rose almost to the rim. Nolan watched her with the same quiet ache he felt every morning: gratitude, fear, and the constant suspicion that he was raising her by guessing. "You have your field trip today," he said. "I know. Permission slip." She froze with the spoon halfway to her mouth. "You were supposed to sign it." Nolan closed his eyes for 1 second. Right. He found the paper crumpled inside her backpack between a library book and 3 drawings of red cars. He signed his name Nolan R. Mercer. The R stood for Reed after his father, though almost no one in Ash Creek knew that. Junie watched him carefully. "Mrs. Navarro is picking me up today," she asked. "Yeah, I've got a delivery run to Reno. The long one." "The long one." She thought about this while chewing. "Can we have pizza tonight?" "We had pizza Sunday. That was Sunday pizza. This would be Tuesday pizza." Nolan looked at her serious little face, the missing sock, the cereal balanced dangerously in her bowl, and felt the tiredness in him soften. "Fine, pizza tonight." By the time Junie left for school, Nolan had loaded 2 boxes into the passenger seat of the Ford. One contained connector seals for a private restoration department in Reno. The other held secondary fuel fittings that had taken 3 weeks, 5 phone calls, and 1 uncomfortable negotiation with a supplier in Medina to secure. The label read, "Bellamy Automotive Group, Attention Restoration Department." He knew Bellamy by reputation. Everyone in the high-end restoration world did. They were ambitious, expensive, and getting better fast. Their CEO, Marina Bellamy, had become something of a name in the industry: young, sharp, relentless, and, depending on who was speaking, either visionary or impossible. Nolan had never met her. He had no reason to. He was just delivering parts. 4 hours west, Marina Bellamy had been awake since 4 o'clock. She stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of her 14th floor office, holding a cup of coffee she had forgotten to drink. Below her, Reno was barely awake. Headlights slid along the freeway. The sky had not yet decided what color it wanted to be. Marina had spent 11 months preparing for this day. 43 meetings, 17 travel delays, 2 failed partnerships, 1 brutal misunderstanding with a Milan auction house. All of it had led to the car sitting in the private showroom downstairs, a 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO valued at $12 million. It was not merely a car. It was proof. Proof that Bellamy Automotive Group could operate at the highest level of the collector market. Proof that Marina was not just the daughter of a man who had built the company before a stroke forced him into retirement. Proof that the board members who had smiled politely when she took over at 26 had been wrong. At noon, 11 investors and private collectors would stand around that Ferrari. They would hear it start. They would see the result of the company's precision, discipline, and taste. Then, if everything went as planned, they would sign preliminary agreements worth more than $40 million in future restoration and acquisition work. A knock came at the door. "Come in," Marina said. Grant Kessler stepped inside with his tablet in one hand. Grant was her head of operations, a man who could make a crisis sound like a weather report, which was why Marina noticed immediately that his face was too still. "What happened?" she asked. Grant looked down once, then back up. "The Ferrari won't start." For a moment, the office became impossibly quiet. The team arrived at 5. Grant continued. Pre-event checks began at 5:15. Battery is good. Fuel delivery appears normal. Ignition has been tested twice. Roland Venn is downstairs personally. Marina set her coffee on the desk very slowly. And he doesn't know yet." Those words landed harder than they should have. Roland Venn did not say he did not know. Roland Venn corrected people. Roland Venn dismissed theories. Roland Venn charged obscene fees because most of the time he was right. If Roland did not know, then the problem was not simple. Or worse, it was simple in a way no one wanted to see. "Get everyone qualified downstairs," Marina said. "Every mechanic, every engineer. Call the Ferrari technical line. Call whoever Roland trusts. Keep the investors and the press away from the showroom until I say otherwise." Grant nodded. Understood. By 9 o'clock, 26 people surrounded the Ferrari. By 10, there were over 40. By 11, the showroom no longer felt like a showroom. It felt like a courtroom where every expert was arguing with the evidence and losing. The Ferrari sat under 3 angled white spotlights, red paint gleaming, body perfect, engine silent. Technicians crouched under it, leaned over it, tested it, retested it. Theories rose and died every few minutes. Fuel issue. No fuel was reaching the carburetor. Ignition timing. Already checked. Distributor advance, within spec. Compression acceptable. Acceptable was not optimal. Marina stood near the rear wall with Grant at her side, watching her carefully assembled army fail in real time. Her phone buzzed twice. The first investors were 20 minutes out. The press had arrived upstairs. Her assistant was asking how long they could keep people drinking coffee before it became suspicious. "We need a contingency," Grant said quietly. "Static display. Controlled narrative. We emphasize provenance and restoration detail." "No," Marina said. Marina. They came to hear it run. Grant said nothing because they both knew she was right. At 11:22, the side door opened. Nolan Mercer stepped into the showroom carrying a cardboard box in both arms with a smaller one balanced on top. He stopped just inside, taking in the polished floor, the crowd of tense specialists, the red Ferrari at the center of the chaos. No one looked at him for more than half a second. Dusty boots, work jeans, dark canvas jacket, tired eyes. Delivery guy. Background noise. A young employee hurried over. "Parts delivery." "Mercer Precision Parts," Nolan said. "Connector seals and fuel fittings. I need a signature from someone in restoration." "He's busy," she said, glancing toward the Ferrari. "I can see that." She signed for one box and pointed him toward the parts room with the other. Nolan started across the edge of the showroom, careful not to get in anyone's way. But as he walked, he listened. Not intentionally, not rudely. It was simply what his mind did. He heard the repeated tests, the frustration under Roland Venn's voice, the rhythm of men and women checking the same systems from different angles and arriving at the same dead end. Nolan slowed, then stopped. The Ferrari sat 12 feet away. He looked once at the engine bay, then again. The morning light struck the firewall at a narrow angle, catching the edge of a connector housing most people would have seen as properly seated. Nolan stared at it for several seconds. The answer was not loud. It was barely there. A fractional misalignment in the primary ignition lead. The kind that would pass a static test. The kind that would fail only under the vibration of cold cranking. The kind of small, wrong thing that could silence a $12 million machine while 60 experts searched for a bigger problem. Nolan's hand tightened on the cardboard box. He thought of Junie. He thought of the 4-hour drive home. He thought of pizza. He thought of the life he had built by staying out of rooms exactly like this one. Then he heard Enzo Valenti's old voice in his memory. "The machine does not lie, but sometimes it whispers." Across the room, Marina Bellamy stood very still, watching everything she had built come dangerously close to collapse. Nolan set the box down. Then he walked toward her. Nolan stopped 6 feet from Marina Bellamy. Grant Kessler noticed him first. The head of operations shifted slightly, not quite stepping in front of his CEO, but close enough to make the message clear. This was not a room where strangers walked up to the woman in charge. Especially not strangers in dusty boots with grease under their fingernails and a delivery receipt folded into one hand. Marina turned. Her eyes were sharper up close, not cold exactly, but trained by crisis. They took in Nolan's jacket, his work pants, the old pen light clipped inside his pocket, the box he had left near the wall, and the expression on his face. He could tell she was already deciding whether he was another interruption or something else. "I'm sorry to bother you," Nolan said, keeping his voice low. "I'm the parts delivery from Mercer Precision. I was dropping off the connector seals." Marina's face did not change. "All right. I know this isn't my place," he continued. "And I know you have a room full of people who know exactly what they're doing." Grant's mouth tightened slightly as if the sentence was already wasting time. Nolan looked past Marina toward the Ferrari. Around it, the best mechanics Bellamy Automotive could gather were circling the same failure again and again. Roland Venn was leaning over the engine bay, speaking with a technician in the tight, clipped rhythm of a man controlling irritation by turning it into precision. "But I think I might see the problem," Nolan said. Grant blinked once. "You think you see the problem?" "Yes, with the Ferrari." "Yes. The Ferrari that has been inspected by 63 trained specialists for 6 hours." Nolan did not argue. "Yes." The silence between them was short, but it had weight. Marina looked at him for 1 second longer than most people would have. That was the first thing Nolan noticed about her that surprised him. She did not dismiss quickly. She listened before deciding. A rare habit in powerful people. Rarer in powerful people under pressure. "What's your name?" she asked. "Nolan Mercer. Have you worked on one of these before?" The question should have been simple. Nolan felt the old door inside himself, the one he kept closed, shift slight lots among yes, he said. Marina studied him. Grant looked at her, then at the clock on the wall. The investors would be downstairs soon. The press was upstairs. Contracts worth more money than Nolan had ever let himself imagine were balanced on the silence of a machine that refused to start. Marina had every reason to say no. Instead, she said, "Show me." The crowd around the Ferrari parted because Marina moved toward it. Nolan followed behind her, aware of every eye turning his way. He had spent years teaching himself not to be the center of a room. He had become good at vanishing into work shirts, delivery routes, small-town routines, and the steady requirements of fatherhood. But now, he walked across polished concrete toward a $12 million Ferrari, while 63 experts watched him like an insult made human. Roland Venn straightened as they approached. "Who is this?" he asked. "Someone with an idea," Marina said. Roland's eyes moved over Nolan and settled on the boots. "A delivery driver." Nolan heard the word. He let it pass. Marina did not. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Give him room." Roland laughed once without humor. "Marina, with respect, we have been through the ignition system 3 times. I know. We have checked the fuel delivery timing, compression distributor coil output, and the car still doesn't start." That stopped him. Not because he agreed, but because the sentence was impossible to argue with. Marina turned to Nolan. "Look." Nolan stepped closer to the engine bay. For a moment, the noise of the showroom disappeared. Not literally. People still shifted behind him. Someone whispered. A tool clicked against metal. But inside Nolan, everything narrowed to the car. The red body, the open hood, the routing of the lead near the firewall, the tiny angle that should not have been there. He did not touch it immediately. That had been Enzo Valenti's first rule. "Don't touch it yet. Just look." Machines spoke through placement where heat marks, tension, absence. A careless mechanic reached for tools too soon. A patient one let the machine finish its sentence. Nolan crouched beside the firewall and took the pen light from his pocket. He aimed the beam into the tight space near the connector housing. Up close, the flaw was even smaller than he had thought. Not loose, not broken, not visibly damaged. The terminal had clicked into place during assembly, but it had seated at a slight lateral offset. 2 millimeters, maybe less. Enough for a meter to read contact. Enough for a static test to pass. Enough for vibration under cold crank to break the relationship between parts that were supposed to trust each other. Behind him, a technician muttered, "He's looking at the ignition lead. We checked that." Roland heard it. "Of course we checked that." Nolan did not respond. He took a small flathead screwdriver from his jacket pocket. It was old, scratched the handle worn smooth by years of use. In a room full of expensive tools, it looked almost embarrassing. He placed the tip against the edge of the connector housing, and applied the slightest pressure. Not force, not a pry, a correction.
There was a click.
Tiny. Almost lost under the showroom lights and human breathing, but Nolan heard it. More importantly, he felt it through the screwdriver handle. The terminal had seated properly. He withdrew the tool and sat back on his heels. "That's it," Roland said, voice flat. Nolan stood. "That may be it. You moved a connector. I seated it. We already checked the connector. You checked continuity. The component was fine. The interface wasn't."
Roland's face darkened.
"You expect us to believe that a 2mm seating issue shut down this engine when every reading came back clean?" "No," Nolan said. "I expect the engine to tell you." For the first time, Marina looked away from Nolan and toward the driver's door. There was no easy choice now. Before, the problem belonged to the team, to Roland, to the machine. If she let this stranger try and he failed, the failure would become hers. The CEO who trusted a delivery driver over her own experts. The young woman who had never truly been ready. The board would not say it out loud at first. They would not need to. Nolan understood that. He could see the decision forming in her face. He also understood his own decision had already been made. He could have walked away. He should have walked away. He could have delivered the parts, driven home, picked up Junie, eaten pizza, and let Bellamy Automotive collapse under the weight of its own missed detail. He had built his life around not stepping into rooms like this, around not becoming useful to people powerful enough to ask for more than he wanted to give. But the machine had whispered, and he had answered. "You want to try it?" Nolan asked. The room went completely still. Marina looked at the Ferrari, then at Roland, then at Grant. Grant's expression gave nothing away, but his eyes said what everyone knew: they had minutes, not hours. Marina walked to the driver's side. Roland exhaled sharply. Someone behind Nolan whispered, "This is insane." Another person raised a phone and then lowered it when Grant looked in their direction. Marina opened the door and lowered herself into the seat. For a second, she was hidden behind the curve of red metal and glass. Then her hand moved to the key. Nolan stood 10 feet in front of the car, flathead in one hand, pen light in the other. He did not pray. He did not hope in the dramatic way people imagined hope. He listened. Marina turned the key. The engine caught. Not weakly, not reluctantly. It came alive with a deep, clean 12-cylinder voice that filled the showroom and seemed to shake something loose in every person standing there. The Ferrari roared once, then settled into a fast idle, steady and confident, as if it had been waiting all morning for someone to ask the right question. No one spoke for 5 full seconds. Then someone whispered, "My God." The sound in the room broke open, half applause after disbelief. Technicians stared at the engine. Grant closed his eyes briefly, the smallest release of tension crossing his face. Roland moved forward with a look that was not admiration yet, but no longer dismissal either. It was something more: uncomfortable recognition. Marina remained seated behind the wheel, both hands in her lap. Through the windshield, she looked at Nolan. He was not smiling. That unsettled her more than if he had celebrated. He was not looking around to see who had doubted him. He was not enjoying Roland's silence. He was listening to the Ferrari head slightly tilted, checking the idle by ear, making sure the repair held, making sure the machine was telling the truth. Marina stepped out of the car slowly. Roland reached Nolan first. "Terminal seating offset," he said. Nolan nodded. "Lateral. Maybe 2 millimeters. It passed static testing because the contact wasn't fully open. Under cold crank vibration, it separated just enough to kill ignition." Roland stared at him. "Where did you train?" Nolan looked back at him. For a moment, the old door inside opened another inch. Italy, Enzo's shop, the burn car, the years when his name had mattered in rooms exactly like this. The years before Junie, before the small house, before he chose to be present instead of famous. "Italy," Nolan said. "Mostly." Marina heard the pause. She heard everything inside it. The investors' first cars were pulling through the gate outside. The crisis was over, but something else had begun. Marina could feel it as clearly as she had felt the collapse coming an hour earlier. This man was not what he appeared to be. No delivery driver saw what Nolan Mercer had seen. No ordinary mechanic carried that much calm into a room designed to humiliate him. She turned to Grant. "Keep the engine monitored. Full operating temperature. Idle stability. Document everything." Grant nodded. Then Marina faced Nolan. "I want to talk to you." Nolan glanced toward the side door, toward the hallway, toward the life waiting 4 hours away. "I have to get home." "I know," Marina said. "I'm not asking you to stay forever. I'm asking for one conversation." He thought of Junie at Mrs. Navarro's house. He thought of pizza. He thought of how one small decision had already pulled him farther from his quiet life than he had intended to go. But he also thought of the young man in the break room he had noticed earlier watching the experts with hungry eyes. He thought of all the doors that stayed closed because nobody inside bothered to look out. Nolan picked up the cardboard box he had left by the wall. "I'll put these parts where they belong," he said. "Then I'll wait." Marina nodded. "Thank you." Nolan walked away while the Ferrari idled behind him, steady as a heartbeat. No one stopped him. No one laughed now, but every eye in the room followed him differently than before. For most of his life, Nolan Mercer had known how to disappear. By noon that day, disappearing had become much harder. Nolan Mercer stopped 6 feet away from Marina Bellamy, close enough to speak without raising his voice, far enough not to look like a man who had forgotten his place. In a room like this, place mattered. He could feel it in the polished concrete under his boots, in the white spotlights burning over the Ferrari and the sharp suits moving around him, in the way every person near the car seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Nolan belonged by the side door with a cardboard box in his hands. He knew that. Everyone knew that. Grant Kessler noticed him first. The head of operations shifted half a step toward Marina, not quite blocking him, but making the boundary clear. His face was calm, professional, and deeply uninterested in surprises. "Can I help you?" Grant asked. Nolan looked past him toward the open hood of the Ferrari. The red paint glowed under the lights like something alive, but the engine beneath it remained silent. Around the car, more than 60 people stood in clusters of stress and expertise, saying the same things in different words. Fuel was good. Ignition was good. Timing was good. Compression was acceptable. Acceptable was not the same as right. Nolan heard it all. More importantly, he heard what was missing. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "I'm from Mercer Precision Parts. I was dropping off the connector seals for your restoration department." Marina's eyes moved from his face to his jacket, then to the grease under his fingernails, then back to his eyes. She did not smile. She did not dismiss him either. "All right," she said. Nolan took one breath. "I don't want to waste your time. I know you have specialists working on it, but I think I might see what's wrong with the car." Grant stared at him. For a moment, the chaos of the showroom seemed to narrow around that sentence. "You think you see what's wrong?" Grant said carefully. "Yes, with that Ferrari. Yes, the Ferrari that has been surrounded by trained mechanics, engineers, and one of the country's leading restoration experts since 5 this morning." Nolan nodded once. "Yes." Grant looked as though the day had found a new way to insult him. But Marina did not look away from Nolan. There was pressure in her face, but there was also calculation. She was not asking herself whether this man looked qualified. He obviously did not. She was asking whether she could afford to ignore anyone who spoke with that much quiet certainty. "What's your name?" she asked. "Nolan Mercer." "Have you worked on a Ferrari 250 GTO before?" The question opened something old in him. For a second he saw a different room, a workshop outside Florence, sunlight on stone walls, the smell of hot oil and metal. Enzo Valenti standing beside him with his arms folded, saying, "Don't touch it yet, just look. The answer is already there if you are patient enough to see it." Nolan pushed the memory down. "Yes," he said, "a long time ago." Grant's eyebrows moved slightly. Marina noticed. Nolan could tell she noticed everything. Behind them, Roland Venn raised his voice near the engine bay. "Then check the distributor again. Under load this time." "We already did," one of the technicians said. "Then do it again." That was the sound of a team running out of ideas. Marina turned back to Nolan. "Show me." Grant's head snapped toward her. "Marina, we have minutes," she said, not looking at him. "Not hours."
She walked toward the Ferrari.
The crowd moved for her automatically. Nolan followed, feeling every eye begin to land on him. By the time they reached the car, conversations had faded into a brittle silence. Roland Venn straightened from the engine bay. He was tall, silver-haired, and controlled the kind of man whose reputation entered a room before he did. His gaze slid over Nolan's jacket and boots. "Who is this?" he asked. "Someone with an idea," Marina said. Roland's mouth tightened. "This is not the moment for ideas from delivery drivers." The words struck the room, and several people looked away not because they disagreed, but because Roland had said aloud what many of them were thinking. Nolan felt the old instinct rise in him leave. Let them have their room, their hierarchy, their expensive failure. He had a daughter waiting 4 hours away. He had promised pizza. He had built an entire life around choosing Junie over rooms like this. But then he looked at the Ferrari again. The machine was not proud. It did not care about titles. It did not know who had a reputation, who had a degree, who had been invited, who had not. It only knew what was true. Somewhere inside that truth, a tiny wrong thing was stopping everything else from becoming right. Marina's voice cut through the tension. "Give him room." Roland stared at her. "You cannot be serious. The car is still dead," she said. "Let him look." That ended the argument, though not the resentment. Nolan stepped to the passenger side of the engine bay and crouched near the firewall. He took the small penlight from his jacket and aimed it into the tight space beneath the wiring route. He did not reach in immediately. He let his eyes adjust. He let the shape of the engine settle. He let the wrong thing reveal itself without forcing it. There it was. The primary ignition lead was seated, but not truly seated. The connector had clicked into place during assembly, but at the wrong angle, off by perhaps 2 millimeters. It would pass a static test. It would show continuity. It would look correct to anyone checking the component instead of the relationship between components. But under cold crank vibration, the contact would break just enough to kill ignition. A whisper of a fault. $1 million silence caused by a 2-millimeter lie. Behind Nolan, someone muttered, "He's looking at the ignition lead." "We checked the ignition lead." Roland replied coldly, "Of course we checked it." Nolan ignored both voices. He pulled a small flathead screwdriver from his pocket. The handle was scratched, the metal worn from years of use. In that showroom, surrounded by diagnostic equipment and specialty tools, it looked almost ridiculous. He placed the tip against the connector housing and applied the lightest pressure. Not a pry, a correction. A tiny click sounded beneath his hand. Nolan sat back. Roland stepped closer. "What exactly did you just do?" "I seated the terminal." "It was already seated." "It was clicked in," Nolan said. "That's not always the same thing." Roland's face hardened. "We ran continuity." "I know. The ignition system tested within spec. The components did," Nolan said. "The interface didn't." The word hung there. Interface. The place where two correct things failed because the connection between them was wrong. Nolan had learned over the years that this was where most people made their mistakes. In engines, in work, in families, in lives. They checked the obvious pieces and forgot that pieces only mattered if they met correctly. Marina looked at him. "Will it start?" "It should." "Should." "It's still a 60-year-old engine," he said. "But yes, I think it will start." The room waited. Now the decision was Marina's. Nolan could see the weight of it settle on her. If she let this go forward and the Ferrari stayed dead, the story would not be that 60 experts had failed. The story would be that Marina Bellamy panicked and trusted a stranger in work boots. Every person who had doubted her would have new evidence. Every board member who thought she was too young would be silently confirmed. But if she refused and Nolan was right, she would lose the car, the presentation, and perhaps something worse, the chance to see clearly, because the person telling the truth did not look important enough. For the first time that morning, Marina's expression changed, not softened, sharpened. She walked to the driver's door. Roland exhaled in disbelief. Grant looked toward the entrance where the first investors would appear any minute. No one spoke.
Marina opened the door.
Lowered herself into the seat and placed her hand on the key. Nolan stood 10 feet in front of the car, his screwdriver still in one hand, his penlight in the other. He did not look at Roland. He did not look at the watching crowd. He listened before there was anything to hear. Marina turned the key. The Ferrari came alive. It did not cough or struggle. It woke with a clean, violent, magnificent sound that filled the showroom from floor to glass ceiling. 12 cylinders caught together rose into a powerful idle, then settled into a steady rhythm that sounded less like victory than inevitability. For 5 seconds, no one moved. Then the room broke open. Someone whispered, "Impossible." Someone else laughed, once stunned. Grant lowered his tablet and closed his eyes for half a second, as if allowing himself the smallest private collapse of relief. Roland stood frozen beside the engine bay, staring not at the car, but at Nolan. Marina remained behind the wheel, her hands resting in her lap. Through the windshield, she looked at the man who had just saved her presentation. Nolan was not smiling. He was not enjoying the humiliation of the experts. He was not searching the room for applause. He was listening to the engine. That was the part that changed something in her. A fraud celebrated the room. A showman watched the faces. A real technician listened to the machine after the miracle, because the miracle only mattered if it held. Marina stepped out of the car. The Ferrari continued to idle steady and alive behind her. Roland approached Nolan first. Terminal seating offset. Nolan nodded. Lateral. Maybe 2 millimeters. It would not show on static testing. No. But under cold crank load, the contact surface separated just enough. Roland looked away, jaw tight. It was the closest thing to agreement he could manage. "Where did you train?" he asked. Nolan hesitated. There it was again. The door to the life he had left behind. He had spent years making sure that when people looked at him, they saw a father, a parts supplier, a quiet man in a small town. Nothing more. That life had protected Junie. It had protected him, too. But now Marina Bellamy was watching him as if she had just realized the delivery driver was a locked room. "Italy," Nolan said. "Mostly." Marina heard the pause. She filed it away. Outside, through the glass, the first investor vehicle rolled through the gate. Grant moved quickly. "They're here." Marina straightened the CEO, returning to her body like armor. "Keep the car running. Monitor idle at full temperature. No one touches that connector unless Nolan or Roland approves it." Roland looked offended by the order, but said nothing. Marina turned to Nolan. "I want to speak with you after the presentation." Nolan glanced toward the side door. Every part of him wanted the clean exit. Deliver the box. Leave the room. Get back to Ash Creek. Get back to Junie. Get back to the life where his name did not make people ask questions. "I have to drive home," he said. "I know. My daughter is waiting." Something in Marina's face shifted, very slightly. "Then I won't waste your time, but I need one conversation." Nolan looked at the Ferrari, alive now because he had chosen not to walk away. Then he looked at the young detailer standing near the hallway, watching him with wide, hungry eyes. A kid no one had asked to learn because no one had thought to teach him. Maybe this was not only about a car. Maybe the thing he had spent years hiding was not meant to stay hidden forever, not if it could become useful to someone besides himself. Nolan picked up the cardboard box from the floor. "I'll put these parts in the restoration room," he said. "Then I'll wait." Marina nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." He turned and walked away while the Ferrari idled behind him, no longer silent, no longer dead. This time, every person in the showroom watched him go. By the time Nolan reached the side corridor, he understood one thing with a clarity that unsettled him. He had come to Bellamy Automotive to deliver parts, but he had just opened a door he was not sure he could close again. The parts room was easier to breathe in than the showroom. Nolan Mercer set the cardboard box on a metal shelf labeled Italian Fuel and Ignition Components and let the quiet settle over him for a moment. The room smelled of rubber paper, mineral oil, and clean metal. It was not glamorous. It was not impressive, but it was honest. Everything in the room had a purpose. Everything belonged somewhere. After the chaos of the showroom, that simple order felt almost kind. Behind the wall, the Ferrari was still running. The sound came through, faintly a low mechanical pulse beneath the building's polished silence. Nolan stood still and listened. The idol remained steady. No stumble, no drop, no uneven hunting from the cylinders. The correction had held. He knew it would, but knowing was not the same as hearing. Machines deserve to be checked after they forgave you. He took out his phone and texted Rosa Navarro. "Running late. Junie okay?" The reply came quickly. "She is fine. We are doing puzzles. She is winning and being dramatic about it." Nolan smiled despite himself. "Tell her I'll be home for pizza." "I already did," she said obviously. He put the phone away and rubbed one hand over his face. The day had become larger than it had any right to be. He had come to Reno to deliver parts. He had planned to sign a receipt, maybe make small talk with someone in restoration, then drive back across the desert before the light changed. Instead, he had stepped into a room full of experts, touched a $12 million Ferrari with a worn screwdriver, and made himself visible. That was the part he did not like. Not the repair. The repair was clean. The repair made sense. What unsettled him was the way people had looked at him afterward, as if the person they had dismissed had suddenly become a problem they needed to understand. He found the employee break room near the corridor. A young man in a Bellamy polo sat at the table with a half-eaten sandwich in one hand and a phone in the other. He looked up when Nolan entered, then straightened as recognition struck his face. "You're him," the young man said. Nolan paused in the doorway. "Depends who him is." "The guy who fixed the Ferrari. I adjusted a connector." The young man gave a breathless laugh. "That is not how people are describing it out there. I'm sure they're making it worse." "Better," the young man said. "Or bigger. I don't know." He put the sandwich down. "I'm Luca." "Nolan. You want coffee?" "Always." Luca pointed toward the counter. "It's fresh. Better than it deserves to be." Nolan poured a cup and sat across from him. Not too close, not too far. The kind of distance that allowed a conversation to exist without demanding one. For a few minutes they listened to the muffled sound of the Ferrari through the wall. Then Luca asked, "How did you see it?" Nolan looked at him over the coffee. "The connector." "Yeah, I mean, everyone checked the ignition. Roland Venn checked it. The senior team checked it. I watched them run tests all morning." Luca hesitated, then added, "I do detailing, so I wasn't allowed near the engine, but I watched." That last sentence mattered. Nolan heard it immediately. "I didn't start with the test," he said. "I started with the shape of the problem." Luca frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the engine wasn't acting like a car with no fuel. It wasn't acting like a car with bad compression. It was acting like a car that wanted to fire and kept losing permission at the last second." Luca leaned forward slightly. Nolan continued. "When people get under pressure, they look harder at what they already believe. Sometimes that helps. Sometimes it traps them. They were looking for a failed part. I looked for a failed relationship between parts." Luca was quiet. Then he nodded slowly, not because he fully understood, but because he wanted to. Nolan recognized that look. He had worn it himself once years ago in a small workshop outside Florence, while Enzo Valenti stood behind him and refused to answer questions too quickly. Enzo had believed that hunger was useful only if paired with patience. A young mechanic could be curious and still useless if he wanted the answer more than he wanted the process. "You want to work restoration?" Nolan asked. Luca blinked. "What? You're watching the engine team through glass while eating lunch like someone who'd rather be starving beside the car." Color rose in Luca's face. "I've asked, a few times, and they say I need more experience." "Doing what?" "That's the thing." Luca looked down at his sandwich. "No one really says. I detail cars. I prep them for delivery. I know paint, trim, interiors. I know how to read what people touched and what they ignored. But restoration is different, apparently. You need the right background." Nolan took a sip of coffee. "Pedigree." Luca gave a short, bitter smile. Yeah, that word. For a moment, Nolan saw the real conflict more clearly than he had in the showroom. The Ferrari had only been the surface of it. The deeper problem was not one dead machine. It was a room full of doors, most of them locked from the inside. Before he could answer, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but Reno-based. Nolan Mercer, he said. It's Marina Bellamy. Luca's eyes widened across the table. Nolan turned slightly away, the car still running. It is, Marina said. Her voice sounded different now, still controlled but less compressed. Idle is stable. Investors are downstairs. The presentation is working. Good. I wanted to make sure you hadn't left. I said I'd wait. People say things. I try not to say them unless I mean them. There was a pause. Then, almost softer, I'm beginning to see that. I'll be ready in about 40 minutes. Please stay. I'll be here. And Nolan, yeah, thank you. The call ended. When he turned back, Luca was staring at him. She called you personally. She had my number from the delivery sheet. That is not the important part. Nolan almost smiled. Eat your sandwich, Luca. The investors stayed in the showroom for nearly an hour. Nolan could track the event by sound, the first wave of impressed silence, the controlled explanations, the occasional low rev of the Ferrari, then the spreading murmur of relief as awe became confidence. When Grant finally appeared at the break room door, his expression was still professional, but something in it had changed. Mr. Mercer, he said, Miss Bellamy is ready. Nolan followed him upstairs. Marina's office overlooked the city, but Nolan noticed the desk before the view. Papers stacked in active piles, technical manuals on the shelves, a framed black-and-white photograph of an old Ferrari at speed on an Italian road course. This was not an office built only to impress visitors. It was a room where someone worked too much and slept too little. Marina entered a minute later. She had removed her blazer. Without it, she looked younger and more tired. She did not sit behind her desk. Instead, she pulled a chair to the front and sat across from him. I'm going to skip the polite version of this conversation, she said. Probably best. Who are you? Nolan had expected the question. He still did not enjoy it. I run Mercer Precision Parts in Ash Creek. That's what you do now. Marina folded her hands. Grant searched your name. Your business record begins 4 years ago. Before that, there is almost nothing. No industry profile, no conference credits, no restoration papers, no employment history that explains what I saw downstairs. Then Grant is thorough. Grant is always thorough, which makes the absence interesting. Nolan looked toward the photograph on the wall. The history is older than 4 years, and I did not make much effort to preserve it. Why? The answer had Junie's name in it, so he gave it. My daughter was 3 when her mother left. I was working internationally then. Europe, California, private collections. The kind of work that owns your whole life if you let it. When it was just me, that was fine. When it was me and a child who needed me every morning, it wasn't. Marina's expression changed. Not pity. Nolan would have hated pity. It was recognition, maybe. Respect. What kind of work, she asked. Ferrari restoration. Period-correct competition work, mostly under Enzo Valenti. The name landed. Marina sat back. Enzo Valenti trained you. For a while? For a while, she repeated, almost disbelieving. Nolan Valenti's shop restored the Bellarosa burn car. I know. The lead technician was listed only as NM in the private archive. Nolan said nothing. Marina stared at him. That was you. It was a long time ago. It was considered impossible. Most impossible things are just expensive, slow, and badly understood. For the first time, Marina laughed softly. Then the laughter faded into something more serious. I want to offer you a job, she said. I know. Head of restoration, full authority, your own team, whatever resources you need. She named a salary that would have paid off his house, rebuilt the shop, replaced the cracked coffee maker 100 times over, and put Junie through college without him lying awake over numbers. Nolan let the offer sit between them. 6 years earlier, he would have said yes before she finished speaking, maybe even thanked her too quickly. But 6 years earlier, he had not known the value of being home at 3:15. He had not known what it meant for a child's face to change when she saw your truck in the school pickup line. "No," he said. Marina went still. "No, it's a good offer, but no. Because of your daughter. Because of the life we built." Marina did not argue. That surprised him too.
What would you accept?
She asked. Nolan thought of Luca in the break room, the way he had said pedigree like it was a wall. He thought of Theo back in Ash Creek, good with his hands and unsure where to take that goodness. He thought of himself at 20 standing in Enzo's shop because one man had opened a door. "I don't want a job for me," Nolan said. "I want to propose something else." Marina leaned forward.
A real apprenticeship program, he said.
"For people already near the work but locked out of it. Detailers, parts runners, general techs. People who have the eye but not the access. Pair them with experienced restoration specialists. Real cars, real diagnostics, real accountability, not charity. A pipeline." Marina said nothing for a long moment. Outside the office, the building hummed. Below them, the Ferrari still ran. "You turned down a fortune," she said slowly, "to ask me to train junior mechanics." Nolan met her eyes. "Yes. Why? Because the things that matter most don't usually make the most noise," he said. "And I'm tired of watching quiet talent disappear because nobody opens the door." Marina looked at him as if the entire day had rearranged itself around that sentence. Then she reached for a notebook. "Tell me how you would build it," she said. And Nolan, who had spent 4 years hiding from rooms like this one, began to explain how to open one. Nolan Mercer did not sleep well that night. He came home late enough that the sky above Ash Creek had already turned black, and Mrs. Rosa Navarro's porch light was glowing across the yard. Junie had fallen asleep on Rosa's couch with a blanket tucked under her chin and one hand still resting on the puzzle they had never finished. Nolan carried her home carefully the way he had carried her when she was 3, and still light enough to fit against his chest like something fragile. She stirred only once. "Pizza," she mumbled. "Tomorrow," he whispered. She accepted this in sleep, which was the only time Junie ever accepted a delayed pizza without argument. After he put her to bed, Nolan stood in her doorway longer than he meant to. Her room was dim, warmed by the orange glow of a nightlight. On the dresser sat one of her drawings, a red car with wheels too large and windows too small. Beside it, a figure in work boots held what might have been a screwdriver. Under the drawing, in careful crooked letters, she had written, "Dad fixes cars." Not famous cars, not impossible cars, not $12 million Ferraris in glass showrooms. Just cars. That was how she saw him, and until that morning, Nolan had believed that was enough. Downstairs, the house was quiet. The cracked coffee pot sat beside the sink. The ceiling stain in the hallway still needed patching. Bills waited on the kitchen counter tucked beneath Junie's school newsletter and an envelope from a supplier in Germany. Everything was exactly as he had left it, but he was not exactly the same man who had left that morning. He had opened a door, and now he could feel the air coming through it. The next day, Nolan tried to return to ordinary work. He drove to the shop before 8, unlocked the side entrance, turned on the lights, and found Maris Keene already at her desk with her reading glasses halfway down her nose. "You look terrible," she said. "Good morning to you, too." That was the polite version. Theo Aranda, his young part-time mechanic, looked up from the second bay. "Long delivery. Longer than planned." Maris watched him over the top of her glasses. "Reno called twice before you arrived." Nolan stopped near the office door. Bellamy Grant Kessler. Very controlled voice. The kind of controlled voice people use when money is involved. Nolan sighed. What did he want? "To confirm your email address, and to ask whether you would be available for a call with Ms. Bellamy tomorrow." Theo stepped closer, curiosity brightening his face. "Bellamy Automotive. Like the Ferrari people."
"Back to work," Nolan said.
Theo grinned. "That means yes." Nolan went into his office and shut the door, though everyone knew the door did very little. The room smelled of paper oil and old coffee. His desk was covered in invoices, supplier notes, and a legal pad where he had once written half a page about an apprenticeship program before deciding it was unrealistic. He had written that page 2 years ago, late at night, after Theo ruined a part because Nolan had been too busy to teach him properly. Nolan had been angry at the mistake, then ashamed of the anger because the truth was, simple talent did not become skill by being left alone. He pulled the legal pad from the drawer. The old notes were messy, incomplete, more feeling than structure. He read the first line twice. There should be a door for people who can see the work before they have the right name. Nolan sat down. For the first time in years, the idea did not feel foolish. It felt overdue. He spent the next several evenings writing the proposal for Marina. During the day, he ran the shop. He sourced gaskets for a Jaguar in Phoenix, argued with a supplier about incorrect alloy specifications, helped Theo diagnose a fuel pressure issue on a customer's Maserati, and picked Junie up from school at 3:15. At night, after Junie went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table and translated years of private frustration into something a CEO could present to a board. The first draft was too technical. It read like a manual. The second was too soft. It sounded like charity, which he hated. The third draft finally found its shape. The program would not rescue young mechanics. It would challenge them. Candidates would come from overlooked roles, detailers, parts runners, junior service techs, paint correction workers, people who already lived near the craft but had never been invited inside it. They would be paired with senior specialists, evaluated by observation, diagnosis, and response to mistakes. Not credentials, not confidence, not the ability to talk well in interviews. The work would decide. On the final page, Nolan wrote the part he almost cut. He wrote about doors. He wrote about how entire industries like to pretend talent was rare while ignoring the places where talent was waiting. He wrote about men and women who learned to see because nobody had taught them the official way to look. He wrote about the cost of letting quiet ability disappear. When he finished, it was nearly midnight. The house was still. He could hear Junie breathing faintly through the ceiling. He sent the proposal before he could talk himself out of it. Marina replied the next morning at 7:38. Read it twice, calling Thursday. Nolan stared at the message longer than necessary. At breakfast, Junie noticed. "Is it bad news?" she asked. "No. Good news, maybe." She tilted her head. "You look like when you fixed the sink and then realized the pipe behind it was worse. That is very specific." "It happened," he smiled. "It's not bad. It's just bigger than I expected." Junie returned to her cereal as if that explained everything. "Big things are okay if they fit in the house." Nolan looked at her. "Where did you hear that I made it up?" Of course she had. The call came Thursday afternoon. Marina did not waste time. "I want to run it," she said. Nolan leaned back in his office chair. The busted armrest creaked beneath his elbow. The program. I'm allocating budget for the first cohort. Grant will coordinate logistics. I added 20% to your estimate." "I added 15. "I know. I trust your technical judgment. I trust my budget judgment." Despite himself, Nolan smiled. "Fair. There's another matter," Marina continued. "The job offer." "No, you didn't let me finish. You were going to offer again." "I was going to change it." Nolan was quiet. "I'm not asking you to move to Reno," she said. "I'm not asking you to leave Ash Creek, close your shop, or disrupt your daughter's life. Consulting technical director. Remote when possible. On-site only when necessary. You choose which projects need your eyes. You help guide the training program. No corporate title on the floor if you don't want one." He looked through the office window toward the shop. Theo was in the second bay, wiping his hands on a rag while studying a part as if it might answer him if he waited long enough. Maris was at her desk pretending not to listen. Outside, Ridgeline Road stretched empty under the afternoon sun. "What situations would require me?" Nolan asked. "Critical acquisitions, early diagnostic assessments, program oversight, and the problems no one expects." The last phrase stayed with him. That was the truth of what had happened. He had not been needed because he had a famous past. He had been needed because he saw differently. And maybe seeing differently was not something he had to hide anymore. "I have conditions," he said. "Tell me. When I'm on site, I work as a technician, not above the team, with them. That will confuse people. Probably. I can live with that. And if there is ever a conflict between this work and Junie wins." "Obviously," Marina said. "I need it said out loud." "Then I'm saying it out loud. Your daughter comes first." Something eased in him. Not completely, but enough. After the call, Nolan stayed in his chair for a long moment. He expected to feel trapped, as if the old life had reached through the phone and caught his sleeve. Instead, he felt something stranger. Space. Not pressure, not escape. Space. Maris appeared in the doorway. "You said yes." Nolan looked at her. "How do you know? You're not pacing." "That's your evidence. You pace when you're about to refuse something you want." He had no answer for that. She stepped inside and set a folder on his desk. "Then Theo needs a raise." Nolan blinked. What if Bellamy is paying consulting fees? Theo can take over the Henderson account, which he already should have been doing. More responsibility means more pay. Nolan almost laughed. "You had this ready. I do the books. I also have eyes." That afternoon, Nolan told Theo about the raise. Theo went silent for so long that Nolan wondered if he had misunderstood. "Seriously," Theo said at last. "Seriously, I thought you were just going to give me more work." "Why would I do that?" Theo shrugged. "That's usually how it goes." Nolan felt the sentence more sharply than expected. There it was again. A door closed so often that people stopped expecting it to open. "Not here," Nolan said. "If you carry more, you earn more. That's how it should work." Theo looked down at the floor, nodding once fast. "Thanks." Nolan turned away before the moment became too large for either of them. But that evening, when he picked Junie up from school, she climbed into the truck and studied him with suspicious intensity. "You look different," she said. "I changed shirts." "No, your face." "What about my face?" "It looks less stuck." Nolan drove in silence for a few seconds. Then he said, "I said yes to something today. Is it scary?" "A little." "Is it good?" "I think so." Junie looked out the window. "Then you can be scared and do it." Nolan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You are 7. "I know." At home, they ate pizza because Junie declared that important decisions required it. Later, after she slept, Nolan stood in the driveway under the wide Nevada sky. The stars were sharp above him. The distance between Ash Creek and Reno suddenly felt both enormous and manageable. He thought about Enzo Valenti, about the life he had walked away from, about Marina who had seen him too clearly to let him disappear, about Luca Marin waiting for someone to believe that hunger could become skill, about Theo stunned by fairness that should not have stunned him. For years, Nolan had believed peace meant keeping his world small enough to protect. Now he was beginning to understand that a life could grow wider without losing its center. The next morning, the alarm vibrated beneath his pillow at 6:47. The stove still took 3 clicks to light. The coffee pot was still cracked. Junie still asked for the cereal from the second shelf. Nothing had changed. And yet as Nolan poured his coffee and watched the sky brighten over Ash Creek, he knew that was not true. Something had changed. This time when the door opened, he had chosen not to close it. The final review took place on a Thursday afternoon in the secondary showroom at Bellamy Automotive Group, the same room where the 1958 Alpha had arrived months earlier under a dark canvas cover. Back then, the car had been silent, elegant, and uncertain, a machine that carried 16 years of stillness inside its engine. Now it sat beneath warm lights with its hood open, the deep blue paint reflecting the faces gathered around it. Nolan Mercer stood near the passenger side, arms folded, saying nothing. That had become his position in rooms like this. Not at the center, not hidden either. Close enough to step in if something mattered. Far enough away to let other people stand where they had earned the right to stand. Luca Marin was at the engine bay with a diagnostic sheet in one hand. Annika Rao stood beside the rear quarter panel, her notes clipped to a board, her eyes moving between the paint layers and the repair lines she had learned to read like a language. Roland Venn stood across from Nolan, silver-haired and severe as ever, though something about him had softened in the months since the Ferrari crisis. He still argued with everyone. He still corrected small errors as if they were personal offenses. But now, when a trainee asked a good question, he answered it. That was not nothing. Marina Bellamy entered last, followed by Grant Kessler and 3 board members who had come to observe the first full demonstration of the apprenticeship program. The oldest board member, Mr. Aldrin, walked slowly with a cane and took his place near the front. He had been the one who asked Nolan how to tell the difference between someone who was slow to learn and someone not worth teaching. Nolan remembered his own answer. You watch what they do when they get something wrong. Today would test that answer. Marina's eyes found Nolan's from across the room. She did not smile immediately. She looked tired but no longer brittle. The hard, glassy tension he had first seen in the Ferrari showroom was gone. In its place was something steadier. She had not taken the New York position. She had not announced it dramatically. She had simply told him one evening over the phone, I think I'm not done building here. Nolan had said, then stay. She had laughed softly. That was almost advice. It was an observation. Now she stood in the room she had chosen to remain in, watching the program she had fought to fund. Grant checked his tablet. Whenever you're ready. Luca swallowed. Nolan saw it. Everyone did. But Luca did not look away from the engine. This vehicle came in with a documented 16-year dormant period, Luca began. His voice shook only once at the beginning. Then training took over. Initial assessment identified a hairline crack in the coolant outlet housing and a reversed spring orientation in the timing chain tensioner. Both issues were corrected before live start procedure. He looked toward Roland, who gave a single nod. Luca continued. The current issue is a slight irregularity in cylinder 3 after warm idle. My first report attributed it to carburetor imbalance. And was that correct? Mr. Aldrin asked. Luca hesitated. This was the moment. Nolan did not move. No, sir, Luca said. It was incomplete. The carburetor was slightly out of balance, but that was not the cause. It was a symptom. I corrected too early before understanding why the reading was uneven. Roland's eyes flicked toward Nolan. Luca took a breath. After rechecking, I found a minor vacuum inconsistency at the intake runner. Not enough to create failure, but enough to alter combustion behavior in cylinder 3 once the engine reached full temperature. I missed it the first time because I was looking for the problem I expected. Nolan felt something loosen in his chest. There it was. Not perfection, something better. Learning. Mr. Aldrin leaned on his cane. And what did you do after realizing the first report was wrong? I wrote a second one, Luca said, and I kept the first one attached. Why? So the mistake stayed visible. The room went quiet. Annika looked down, smiling slightly. Marina's expression changed in a way Nolan had come to recognize, not pride exactly, but the deeper thing beneath it. The relief of seeing a belief survive contact with reality. Roland cleared his throat. The second report is correct. Coming from Roland Venn, the sentence might as well have been applause. Luca looked as if he were trying very hard not to react. Then Annika stepped forward. Her part of the demonstration was quieter, but no less important. She explained the rear quarter repair, the original paint preservation, the decision not to erase every mark of age simply to make the car look new. She spoke about restraint, about knowing when restoration became destruction disguised as improvement. This repair is part of the car's life, she said. If we remove every scar, we don't return the vehicle to its truth. We create a cleaner lie. Marina looked at Nolan then. He knew why. Machines were not the only things people tried to over-restore. For years, Nolan had believed that healing meant leaving the past behind so completely that no one could see where it had hurt him. He had hidden his old career, his reputation, even the part of himself that missed the work. He had built a good life with Junie, and it was good, but he had mistaken quiet for wholeness. Now he understood something different. A scar did not make a thing less worthy. Sometimes it proved what had survived. When the presentation ended, the board members approved funding for the program's second year without argument. Even the two who had voted no months earlier did not object. The numbers helped. The progress reports helped. But Nolan knew it was not only numbers. It was Luca standing beside the engine with both reports in his hand. It was Annika naming value where others had seen only surface work. It was Roland Venn admitting in his own difficult way that the door had needed opening. After the board members left, the smaller group remained around the Alpha. Roland walked to Nolan. For a moment, neither man spoke. "The boy did well," Roland said. "Luca did well," Nolan corrected. Roland absorbed the correction, then nodded. "Luca did well." That was as close to peace as men like Roland usually came. Nolan accepted it. Marina came over next. "There's someone downstairs asking if she is allowed to see the old blue car." Nolan turned. Junie stood at the entrance beside Rosa Navarro, wearing a yellow jacket and holding a sketchbook against her chest. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with the full force of a 7-year-old discovering that the world was bigger than she had been promised. "You brought her?" Nolan asked. Marina's smile was small. "You said she wanted to see it when it was finished." "It isn't finished." "No," Marina said, "but it's alive." That seemed more important. Junie approached slowly. For once, she had no immediate comment. She looked at the Alpha, then at Nolan, then at Marina. "Is this the car that was sleeping?" she asked. Nolan crouched beside her. "For 16 years, and you woke it up." "A lot of people helped wake it up." Junie looked at Luca, Annika, Roland, and Marina, carefully assigning credit in her mind. "Can I touch it?" Nolan looked at Marina. Marina looked at Roland. Roland looked as if the entire civilization might collapse from the question. Then he sighed. Hands clean, Junie held them up. Roland inspected them with dramatic seriousness. "Acceptable." Junie touched the side of the Alpha with 2 fingers gently as if greeting an animal that might startle. Then she opened her sketchbook and showed Marina a drawing of a red car, a blue car, and a tall figure in boots standing between them. "That's Dad," she said. "He fixes fancy cars and normal cars." Marina looked at the drawing for a long moment. "He does, and he comes home for pizza." Nolan closed his eyes briefly. Marina's smile softened. That might be the more important part. Junie nodded, satisfied that the CEO understood the hierarchy of things. Later, as the sun went down over Reno, Nolan and Marina stood outside near his truck. Junie was inside with Rosa, showing Annika her drawings. Luca was still asking Roland questions, and Roland impossibly was answering them. "I used to think change meant losing something," Marina said. Nolan leaned against the truck. "Sometimes it does." She looked at him. "But not always," he continued. "Sometimes it means making room for what was already trying to grow." Marina was quiet for a moment. "And what are we making room for?" The question was not only about the program. Nolan heard that. He felt it in the careful silence between them in the months of phone calls, in the way she had learned Junie's name before asking for anything else, in the way he no longer wanted to disappear when she looked at him. He did not rush the answer. "My life is in Ash Creek," he said. "I know. My daughter comes first. I know that too." He looked through the glass and saw Junie laughing with Annika, saw Luca beside the Alpha, saw Roland bent over the engine with the patience of a man teaching despite himself. He saw the life he had chosen and the wider life that had grown around it without breaking the center. But there might be room, Nolan said, for someone who understands that. Marina's eyes shone slightly in the evening light. She did not step closer. She did not need to. Something had already crossed the distance. "I can understand that," she said. When Nolan drove home that night, Junie fell asleep halfway across the desert with her sketchbook open in her lap. The highway stretched ahead, dark and familiar. Behind him, Bellamy Automotive kept working. The apprenticeship program would continue. Luca would make more mistakes and better reports. Annika would teach others to read paint like memory. Roland would argue correct and eventually admit when someone was right. Marina would build something that did not require her to run from one larger room to another. And Nolan would go home. Not because he was hiding anymore, because home was the center from which everything else could grow. At 6:47 the next morning, the alarm vibrated beneath his pillow. The gas stove still took 3 clicks to light. The coffee pot was still cracked, though Marina had sent him a new one that sat unopened on the counter because Junie insisted the old one had character. The ceiling stain still needed patching. Junie came downstairs with one sock missing.
"Pizza tonight," she asked.
Nolan poured coffee and looked out at the pale Nevada morning. The world was not perfect. It never had been. But it was alive, running steady, held together by attention, patience, second chances, and the people who stayed. "Obviously," he said. Junie grinned. And for Nolan Mercer, that was the sound of everything working exactly as it should.